Hi everyone, welcome to day 3 of Learning Redefined, hosted by Showbie. It's our first kind of conference, and for those of you that don't know what Showbie is a hybrid learning platform. It's kind of supporting over 3 million educators globally. It's kind of very focused on providing richer, deeper, more meaningful feedback. And Showbie's been working alongside educators for over 10 years now. So for this particular session, we have Daniel Toms with us. And Daniel is, I'm going to give him some time to just do a bit of a description, tell me about himself. But Daniel is head of computing at Harrogate Grammar School. I've had the privilege to go there. I've had the privilege to kind of speak to the Red Kite Alliance, which the school is part of as well. He supports the one-to-one iPad scheme or one of the largest ones in the UK. And I'm kind of really interested to get his take on technology, teaching and learning, and anything else that's on his mind as well. So we're probably going to have about 35 minutes or so just to kind of have a conversation and just kind of hear wisdom, experience, thoughts from Dan. So Dan, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you, background, where you're from, all that kind of stuff. How did you get to where you are today?
Right, so I mean, it feels like I've been at Harrogate Grammar School forever, but it's probably about 15 to 16 years. So I'm head of computing there. I actually, as well as doing that, Harrogate Grammar School is lucky to become one of the new computer science hubs for the NCCE. So I'm now I'm the hub lead, and I'm also the head of computing. It's a lovely combination. So I get to do everything. I get to teach. I get to train. I get to work with people from other schools, support them, almost like an SLE role, subject leader, that used to be to go into schools, talk to people, talk to their students. It's a really fun job. But yeah, you get to see a lot. You get to see a lot and really reflect on your teaching, which I think sometimes if you're a full-time teacher, you don't get the opportunity to really reflect on your what you're doing in quite the same way I get this time and space to be able to do it. So I'm very privileged.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about Harrogate Grammar. What's the context? Because we've got people today from the UK, but we'll also have people internationally kind of joining us as well. So set us the context of your school. What does that kind of demographics, the school makeup, and so on?
Harrogate Grammar School is a very large school. In the nearly 2,000, I think. It's a comprehensive school. It isn't a grammar school. I'm not quite sure why it retained the name, but it's mixed ability. You don't have to pass an exam to get into it. It's very privileged to be a teaching school at the heart of the Red Kite Alliance, and the Red Kite Alliance is a very progressive alliance. It is also a MAT as well, a growing MAT. But it's in a privileged area. Obviously, Harrogate's a privileged Leafy Lane sort of area. But in the alliance, we have all sorts of schools in our alliance, from sort of probably North Leeds, a whole mix of different schools, which is fantastic, and we all work together quite harmoniously. So what we did in North Leeds about a decade ago was quite a few of the schools, not all of them, but quite a few of them, started on this journey of sort of one-on-one implementation of computing devices. And we chose the iPad at the time. So about 4 or 5 schools went down that route over the period of a year. And we really, I thought at the time it was going to be a turning point. I thought that that was it. EdTech was going to take hold in schools, and every school, regardless of their, whether they were privileged or not privileged, was going to have, because it just seemed like a no-brainer at the time. But a decade later, we're only just getting there, I think, and getting there through tragic circumstances, which is obviously a sort of a global pandemic.
And obviously, you were one of the early adopters of a one-to-one program, the school was. What was it like going through the pandemic? Did you feel that you were equipped? Were there any surprises kind of, moving into that? I know the school uses Showbie as well. I know you have a cloud-based infrastructure as well. So like, what were there any surprises, or did you feel like actually, our workflow systems and what we had was sufficient for us to kind of, handle what came with the lockdown?
Well, I think everybody was a bit. I mean, it's a completely change. It's a change from using one-on-one devices within a school to taking on a completely remote curriculum. I think a lot of the big decisions we had already made, so it was definitely a head start in the sense that we decided on a learning platform. We decided on Showbie. We decided on Showbie a decade ago when they were still using WebDAV. I mean, meeting Colin at Bet and talking to him, and over the past decade, and seeing the change and transformation in this application has been amazing. But that decision had been made, and I think it's the right decision. And I think other schools have that. I mean, that decision to go with Showbie and was at another school, well, not in our position. So my wife's school, and my wife was really involved with me in the one-on-one iPad scheme a decade ago, and she's moved schools subsequently and working in inner city school in Leeds. And they'd not really, I mean, for various reasons, political reasons, I don't think EdTech has been out of favour in UK schools. And so they haven't been able to, although they wanted to for a decade to have a one-on-one implementation, they haven't been able to do it. But the decision that was made almost instantaneously for that school when we went into lockdown was to get Showbie and to use Showbie. And that decision, making that quick decision about what you're going to use as a platform to deliver remote education was probably the key decision to make. I think for all schools. And I think if you hummed and hard for a bit, then, or you went down the wrong route, maybe, I'm not saying Edmodo is wrong, but if you went down one and then shifted to another route, I think it became difficult because your teachers weren't prepared. I think what the one-on-one iPad device did two things for us. One, we'd made those decisions a long time ago, and all the staff and all the kids just knew where initially the work would be. Moving to live lessons and remote lessons was obviously, it was a lot of work still, because we hadn't been working that way, but we knew how we were going to do it because a lot of that had already been established. So that was definitely the first plus. The second plus is obviously they all had a device that they could use, that they'd been working on for a decade to get internet in their homes, so they could do their homework, they could do so, and it is a privileged area, but there are people who are definitely not privileged in Harrogate. And we'd worked out a lot of those things that other schools had to work out in a very short space of time. So we had some of the same issues at other schools, but the big decisions had already been made, and we were ready to make those small decisions about, which video platform were we going to use. How exactly are we going to structure a timetable? That sort of, and that we had time to make those and get it right first time, because we weren't running around because we didn't have VLE.
So just from a classroom perspective, I mean, through this conference, we've had like school leaders, we've had panel discussions and so on. But I think like the educator perspective of what goes on in the classroom, when you've got a one-to-one environment that's enabled, when you're using Showbie, Socrative, and so on. And maybe you've been doing this for a long time, so I don't know if it's the right question for you or not, but what is it that you can do now that you might not have been able to do in the past, right? Or if you moved to a school where there wasn't this kind of an approach, how would that impact you in terms of workload, in terms of teaching and learning, and how you interact with the students and so on?
So I think we have been using it for a long time, and I think when you see this is when you have a teacher that is teaching at our school, and then for career progression they move on and they move to a different school. And I think initially there is a shock, definitely. Having a one-on-one implementation makes a lot of things very easily. Now, I would say communication is very, very easy. Giving feedback to students is straightforward, and distributing resources is incredibly. It's cheap, but it's also really straightforward. So there are some basic things that every child having a device is a big shift when you move away from it. Stuff that you just take for granted, not having to get into school early to be in a photocopying line, not having to book out a computer room if you want to use the internet. Those kinds of things are you just take for granted. And it doesn't mean that when you go to another school you miss them, but I think it doesn't replace good teaching. It just makes those things easier. Now, there are things that you miss, and does make not only teaching easier but better. But it isn't particularly the big things that you forget. Is like, I'm going to have to remember to photocopy stuff, and I'm going to have to, if I want to talk to this student or arrange a meeting for them, I've got to remember to tell them in the lesson, because I can't just send a message through Showbie and he will get that in their iPad, and then they'll arrive at the classroom at break time to pick up the thing that they miss. That kind of stuff that I take for granted, that in other schools, they can't communicate to students or feedback with them in that way. I can give homework back before the lesson starts, which is just like, wow. So at the start of the next lesson, we can do, feedback on the homework that they did and handed in before I saw them. And just like that, it's just like, okay, not a big problem. Hand it in, I'll mark it, and the cycle's a bit longer, but it's probably not that much less effective. Timely feedback is important, but you can still do it. It just makes things a little bit harder, I think.
I suppose it's efficiencies, isn't it, really, that you're kind of talking about there, in terms of time and the speed at which you can kind of do things. But potentially some learning aspects as well, maybe, I don't know, in terms of, one of the things I was quite impressed with that you shared with me the last time we presented was your the way you gave feedback using video on handwritten stuff. Like, that was, I thought, okay.
These things are what I was trying to get at before was not, that was the things you miss immediately. That's the stuff that, the niceties of being able to communicate, and the efficiencies of distribution, and the ability to not have to, it seems barbaric. This sounds from a very privileged position, that I remember when I was before it, you had to take your whole class to another classroom to use the computer. It's it's like an animal. But it's just like that, just because then it stops you from using some sorts of resources. Because is it really worth that level of disruption? So that obviously is an impact. But I think you're getting right about what it opens up eventually after a decade. You don't realize what some of the stuff that you're doing that you just can't do. So there are things that open up to you. For example, you've got your marking in real time. And I think these things creep up on you, partly because of COVID, because a lot more people are used to using cameras and feeling comfortable using cameras, and talking and creating videos. But then you find yourself sitting, marking a paper, and video yourself marking it. And this idea of metacognition. I think when we started, I'm going all over the place at the minute, but when we started the iPad program, the three pillars that we went with was metacognition, assessment for learning, and feedback. They're being the three pillars of why you should implement. What benefits, big benefits you get from a one-on-one program. You have to say, if you're going to use the iPads, are you using it for these three things? So are you using it assessment for learning? Are you using it for metacognition, or are you using it to give feedback to the students? And I think on all three pillars over a decade, that has still been the case. That is the fundamentally, apart from the niceties of communication, which I guess is feedback, those are the three things that make a one-on-one implementation work. So in terms of metacognition, if you're sitting when you're reading through your marking and you're talking about why they got the question wrong, you're giving a verbal feedback to them, but you're also explaining how you would have approached that question. Now, that time, you have to do that. You have to mark their paper. Now, normally that would be sat at the kitchen table, maybe doing on a Sunday night, and the student would not be aware of that, the process that was going on, that marking process. When Whereas now you can just turn the video and you sit there and you verbalize how you would have approached it, your metacognition for solving this problem, and then suddenly that is recorded, and the students got, I mean, whether they watch it or not is a different matter. But if they do watch it, that's incredibly powerful to help them develop their, you know, their exam approach and how to think about and solve problems. And I think we're all gaining since COVID. We're all gaining an insight into how, you know, what is positive about video conferencing like this. So I was today I was doing an Isaac computer science CPD session, which was 3 hours. It was quite nice. So you normally be a full day. Instead, I split into 3 hours. You had half an hour between each session. And I got through the first session. I hadn't recorded it. And the way that I deliver CPD is a little bit like the way I'm talking now, quite intensely in talking and using metacognition a lot. My own sort of modeling metacognition and a live programming, because I'm obviously a programmer, and that's what I teach. And they can usually get it for the first hour, and then after the first hour, they get overloaded. And there's, you know, Dan, you know, slow down, or, you know, have you videoed this, what you're doing? Because I'm doing a lot of live coding. And I said, this is great. We want to follow this, but if you video yourself, then we can slow down. We can go back over it with the materials later, and we can learn what the process. Because I'm talking about the process all the time, just like I do with the kids. But this is with teacher training, and they want that video. So teachers certainly. I mean, there's no doubt that teachers are constantly, you know, thinking about metacognition and how they learn. I mean, if anybody's learning in the classroom, it's a teacher, isn't it? So
yeah.
And that's so yes, it enables that. Having just a camera and the ability to record the screen is revolutionary in a lot of ways. If you remember to do it, and the students are actively involved and prepared to watch it. I mean, it's a lot to watch, an hour.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to watch.
So Dan, are there instances even now where, you know, where you feel technology, it's better not to use technology? Yeah. Are there aspects of things? And I think that's kind of sometimes I think that, you know, the way in which one-to-one schools are seen, you know, is kind of like, is this going to be like technology all day, every day? That's what the children are doing, and so on. So, you know, what's the other aspect or the other side of the coin where actually, you know what, there are times potentially when it's just better not to use technology?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally talking to the wrong person. There is never a moment when you shouldn't be using technology. I mean, but it's unfair because I'm obviously a computer science teacher.
Of course.
And what I'm teaching is programming, and definitely there's a lot of, you know, pedagogy about how you should teach unplugged computer science, and I understand that. But I like using computers. I think they're powerful tools. I think when I started off as an ICT teacher, when in education 20 years ago, plus when the Labour Party was first there, and pumping huge amounts of money into schools and pumping huge amounts of money into ed tech. And I think when we were at the heights in ICT as an ICT teacher, it was a sole subject. It never really made a lot of sense to me that, and perhaps it came to everybody, that this should be a lesson which was separate to the rest of the curriculum, because ICT, or I mean, I'm not sure the word is, but, you know, ed tech should be available to every part of the curriculum. And a lot of the stuff that we were teaching in the early ICT lessons were much more appropriately. I mean, you've been talking about spreadsheets. There were other aspects, like maybe in business studies, where the context of it made a lot more sense. So I think there is, in other subjects, I can't really talk for other subjects, but I certainly think there are aspects, there are times when computers make sense in other subjects, and I think they should be used, but it should be easy for them to use it. And in terms of being easy, there shouldn't be any friction. The student should know how to use the devices they got. They should work. They should have good internet connections. If they want to set something for homework, there should be this softening the border between school and home. There should be reducing in the gap so that, you know, privileged students have access to technology outside of the classroom. So everybody should have access to it. It's almost a fundamental right, and it's more than just a right of a single device in a house. It's every single child should have access to a device, because they shouldn't be waiting to be using it. In an ideal world, everybody should have a device. Now it's costly, but I think we've seen over this last year, the price of not investing in ed tech for the last 10 years. We've had to do it very, very quickly. And I mean, I work for the BCS. I don't mean work. Volunteer is a better word. And I think I don't want to patronize them, but I think, they're waking up to this idea that every child has a right. I mean, every family has a right to the internet, but I think every child has a right to have some kind of device which enables them to do computing. So, to go back to your question, I'm not the right person to ask you, because I think it's so fundamentally important in my subject to be using devices, but I think it should be accessible to every subject. If they want to use it, they should be able to use it, and it should be frictionless. And I mean, not to push iPads, but to come back to why I think the iPad scheme at our school has been so successful. And people might feel this is a negative rather than a positive, is that these devices, these iPads, I mean, certainly I have children of in year 10 and year 6, and they are on their iPads all the time at home. And they have phone. Well, my daughter doesn't have a phone, my son has a phone, and they love their iPads. And I think I don't have any analogies for where, perhaps other than I'm going to make that it's patronizing, a football, where a kid would be so in love with a piece of educational equipment that they look after it, they know how it works. So when you say about how the ease of use, having a device that a child nurtures and loves, that can also be used in the classroom, and they know immediately how to look after it, how to open it, how to work, how to download apps to it. I think that, I think that's why the iPad was being so successful. That if it was a device that was, a work device, which they didn't cherish, I think it would probably be so frictionless to use in the classroom.
So just kind of coming on, because I'm kind of conscious of time as well. But it's fine. Some kind of good points that have kind of been made there. I think one of the things that I wanted to kind of ask you is, what's next for you? Like, what's on your kind of mind with kind of next steps post COVID and all that kind of stuff? I know just before we kind of went live, we were talking about exams and the whole kind of I suppose fiasco is the right term, maybe, I don't know, at the moment, where teachers are kind of really trying to figure out grades and all that kind of stuff. I suppose that might be the immediate focus, but are there potentially things like technologically, strategically, that you might be looking at from a strategic perspective in the school? What are the next steps? What are the things that you want teachers to know about and develop and grow and so on?
So I think I've been very lucky in my career, and I wouldn't like to. It isn't prescient. It's just that it happens that the things that I've been interested in have aligned with sort of the way education has gone. So when I joined teaching 20 years ago, I was really, really interested in. I was a biology teacher. Started off as a biology teacher, but I became very, very interested in ICT, and I went back to university, Bradford University, and did a computing degree, which was just an unbelievable year spent doing an MSc in computing. I came back and was able to teach computing at a time where I rode the wave of ICT, and then rode immediately the wave of computer science, and found myself with the skills that very few people had, and I was able to really do what I like. So I do what I like, but sometimes it just has worked. So I loved iPads when they first came out, and I just said, let's get these in school, and for all these reasons, and it was fantastic, and so I'm not forward thinking necessarily. I get interested in stuff, and luckily so far it's been the way that education has kind of gone in a route. So what I'm interested in at the minute is sort of this sort of COVID legacy, and where does it take us? The fact that we've had remote education for 2 years. And so I've been working with a couple of students, sort of remote students in my classroom. So taking it that step, what would happen if you had remote students in your classroom, particularly in computer science? It's not applicable to all subjects, but there are very few teachers, computer science teachers, And the students that want to do it is still a little bit niche, and they are spread across various schools which can't then accommodate them. What would it look like if you taught a student remotely? And there are traps there, because, and I think we all realize the traps is that teaching, I mean, eventually when schools got to the point where they were live lessoning, it's not, I'm not saying it was easy, but there were things that it was possible. What was hard was when you've got this kind of blended learning, and it's the wrong word, where you've got some students in the classroom and some students remote. That's really hard, because you're trying to do two things at once. You're trying to teach students in the classroom, but also teach them remotely. That's really difficult to do. What's quite hard to do is how do you work that? So one of the things that we looked to technology. So we got some. I know it sounds terrible, but iPad Pros have this transparency feature where you can have one AirPod in, and you can have it on transparency, so you can hear the class. You can talk to the class, but the person who's remote can also talk to you. It has like a beeline straight into your ear. You have your screen, which is being recorded, and you can use technologies like in computer science. It's particularly useful for this. We have Trinket.io, and it's an online IDE, and you can see their work. So you just bring their work up, and it's as easy to bring the work up of the student in the classroom as it is to bring up the work of the student remotely. So what's the potential for that? What's the potential for taking this COVID legacy? Everybody knows and understands Zoom. We know that some things, I mean, I never want to go to another meeting in Cambridge or in London. I just want to have a remote meeting. I don't see why I would need to have to travel the train for 4 hours for a 2-hour meeting. And I think everybody's,
and the costs associated with that as well, right? Because that's pretty significant.
Yeah. So there is definitely COVID legacy, and I think it's thinking about that now, and the things that we all change, and how does that move into a classroom situation? I think we're all thinking about it in terms of administration. Parents' evenings. I mean, I guess we might go back, but they've been unbelievable using technologies.
There's a lot of
the tools
that said that.
And so, but what does it mean in the classroom? And it's hard to know, because a mixed economy is difficult. So having some people in the classroom and some people out of the classroom is not. It's good with everybody there. It's okay if nobody's there and everybody's in the same boat, as long as they've got devices, as long as they've got a good internet connection. But if you're trying to do both things at the same time, are you letting down one side but not another? What circumstances can you do that? I can see a reason for doing it. It's whether you can actually, how do you do that? And make it so people don't lose out. So it's no sort of bringing people and saying, you can do computer science because you can go to Harrow Grammar School remotely. We set that up, and then actually we let them down by not providing the, even with the technology available, the most appropriate or the best education. They get a similar education, they don't get a lesser education. That's
and I suppose and that's kind of your context. But when we start thinking about the majority of the schools that don't have a one-to-one program, that don't have access, or even kind of communities where having a device per child at home is even a difficult thing, or not possible, then that whole, and then the need for teachers to understand technology, and that investment in trainings not being there, and so on, that potentially, I think, for a lot of schools was a difficult place to be. And I think you're right that doing the hybrid thing, where potentially you've got some children in schools, so even if you have been used to technology and one-to-one programs, it's a difficult kind of concept to understand and make work, and you've got to think about so many different things, right, for that to be remotely kind of successful. But I agree with you in that, coming out of COVID, there's a lot of learning that's happened. I think it's certainly opened up the doors for teachers to look at technology and communication and the way in which they interact with students. I think teachers have been a lot more open-minded about like feedback and digital feedback and what that might look like and how that's possible. I think things like remote assessment have certainly kind of played a big role in this as well. I remember during the first lockdown, it was all about workflow and submission and feedback and so on. But by the time it got down to second one, I had and this might have been my own personal experience, but I had a lot of teachers that were then coming back saying, well, what does assessment look like? And can we do that remotely? And, is it, what other benefits does technology bring? And then it was at that point that they saw things like Socrative, where it's auto marks for you, color codes, produces a report, and extra things that they probably weren't expecting, that then became kind of quite interesting as well. But yeah, I mean, I hope that there's a lot of positive that comes out of COVID, and I think that, and certainly my hope is that the Department for Education kind of look at this and begin to think about a deep and meaningful kind of digital strategy that works across the country. Although today there was an announcement I read, or an article that I read, where I think the DFE are distributing, I don't know, 350,000 abacuses across the schools. Yeah. So I don't know what that means for our future, but that's kind of where we are at the moment.
Yeah, I think it would be shocking if they. I mean, I'm pretty shocked that 10 years ago, it's now 10 years since we implemented our one-on-one iPad device, and we're still, not every school is there. And I think in another decade, if that's still the case, I think that would be, it would be really difficult to take. I mean, I don't think. Hopefully, the thing that comes out of this remote of COVID, the big thing for education is valuing again educational technology, and I think it has been undervalued for the last decade. And I think it's expensive, but I think it is vital. And if we did go into another lockdown, if you're not, if you haven't, it's just, I mean, it just makes it would be horrific if they haven't invested in technology. And we're back to this with the situation that we're in now, where, I mean, we don't use the word catch up, but that people have lost education, and we'd be in a much better place with a huge amount of investment in ed tech. I mean, for the future, it's really, really important. Computers aren't going away, and they're becoming incredibly powerful. I mean, just I don't know if we got time for a final.
Absolutely, please do, Dan.
And so the light bulb moment for me was, I mean, around Socrative and Showbie, and was this idea that you do assessments online. So I'd done Socrative perhaps before Socrative was bought out by Showbie. A year, 18 months, 2 years ago, did some Socratives on just standalone ones, and then realizing that as Showbie took over and started updating the software, you could go back and you could remark now past assessments. So that assessment wasn't done. That assessment existed as binary in a database, and I can go back into that now, and I can remark it. So half of it, I mean, it wasn't a great system. Half of it would be marked. The bit that was easy would be marked, would be the multiple choice, and then there would just be a grey area on where I had to go and sort of self-mark, go in and write on it in pen and annotate it in quite a difficult workflow. But when they updated the software, suddenly capabilities that we didn't have, we now have. But that it's not just for new tests that you do, it's for old tests as well. So you can go back to old tests and you can remark them. And I think that the crucial thing is that, a child's GCSE is 2 years. So I was able to go back with my year 11s to assessments that they'd done at the start of year 10, and I could remark them in a way that would generate data that could be used in a portfolio of evidence. And that was just like, wow, that wasn't dead, that assessment. That assessment it now can produce something which is useful, because I can award marks. You can go into a spreadsheet, you can download it from Socrative, upload it into my mark book, bang, on what I thought was dead assessments. And they weren't dead assessments. They were just waiting in Socrative's databases, just waiting for Socrative engineers to allow a function that allows you to self-mark
It's
assessments. I mean, you may not, people may not understand what I'm talking about, but it was that revelation that zeros and ones, you just have to create a new program and you can reprocess old data, and it's fantastic.
And I think that's the power of technology, right? People, the everyday person that might not be into technology, they know that as an update, yeah, and I just need to do an update, and hey, I get some new features that pop up, right? And I think that's been a significant investment for schools that were early adopters of technology, because they've been getting updates all along. Suddenly I couldn't do something yesterday and now I can. And I think that's certainly one of the kind of benefits that is impacting kind of teaching and learning, because there are things that you can do, like the example that you gave, but then also from a organizational perspective, efficiency. So there's always finance people in schools that are counting up, how much things going to cost and so on. But actually, there are opportunities now to have discussions to say, well, actually, we don't need to do this anymore. I always remember when I first saw the scan document feature in Showbie, the fact that not taking a photo, but you actually scan it. Scans the image, handwritten book, and so on, uploads it. If you do multiple pages in the background, it turns it into a PDF and uploads it. The teacher's none the wiser. As far as the teacher's concerned, it's the image of the book, and then you can annotate and mark and that. And that for a lot of schools kind of began to change the workflow idea, that I don't need to take all the books home to mark. The work that's been done has been uploaded, and now as a teacher, I can give feedback, I can mark, I can do the things with that, and the students will receive that. It's all in one place. I haven't got the ceremony of taking books home and sitting down at home and marking it and so on. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that these are definite considerations that are worthwhile taking into account. And I think from what's also interesting from something that you said is that you've had a 10-year journey. So you've been able to see it develop and grow with the incremental kind of upgrades that have happened, both probably with the technology, with software, and so on. What the nice thing about that is that teachers develop with that. It's small incremental steps with new features that actually now I can use this, and now I can use this, and it's not just like one big new download that totally changes the whole kind of software and how it's worked and where's this button gone and all that kind of stuff. So I think that there's a lot of power to kind of investing in that approach.
I think one of the signs of a good piece of software is that people want to use it. So it can go too far. I mean, if anybody's in terms of the thing at the minute is Microsoft Forms. I think people are in love with that, and I think what's coming is a wave of forms from everybody realizing the power of being able to just send off a form really easily, and then you can spend your life not realizing the rest of the school has to complete form after form after form because it's now so easy. So you're making the impossible possible, and that isn't always a benefit. It has to be, all technology has to be thought through. But I think perhaps the greatest, when people use your technology inappropriately because they love it so much. So, I mean, I've seen that a lot with Excel over the years, where people would just use Excel for completely inappropriate reasons, where they should have used a different technology, perhaps even a Word document, almost like sending letters in Excel because they knew it and loved it. And it was so much easier to do a table in Excel than it was to do a table in Word. I think I've seen it happening with Showbie in schools, is that people become so familiar with the technology and it works so well with their classes and become so familiar with it, and it's helped them in so many ways. They start using it in perhaps in an inappropriate way, and not where they try and share information between teachers on it. And I don't want to go into the discussion, but it's just like, I think it's quite hard with technology to, when it's easy to use, to realize what the problem is it is solving. And I think sometimes you have to think quite hard about that. And it's obviously clearly when people develop it, they do think really, really hard about what the problem they're trying to solve. So in Showbie, you're talking about a teacher and then students. If you look at that and say, well, I have a manager and I have teachers, surely that Showbie will work for that. And it might but in really odd ways. And I think when people are looking to Showbie to solve other problems which it wasn't designed for, I think that's got to be praised for the software because they feel so comfortable with it. But I think you see that again and again in technology is sometimes technology being used inappropriately, and sometimes that can tip over into creating more work.
Absolutely.
And causing frustrations because you're not using the software for what it was designed. And I'm not sure what the solution is there, because it's kind of praise as well, because it's easier to use than something else. I'm not sure what question I was answering there, but anyway.
No, but that's fine. I think that viewpoint is actually quite unique. And you're right, it is praised because people get comfortable with the technology, and quite often people have started off, uncomfortable with the technology. So I think that's quite a nice thing. Dan, I'm gonna stop there. We've gone over time, but it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much for kind of taking the time out and sharing your thoughts as well. Hopefully sometime in the future we'll kind of chat again and have more conversations, potentially with examples from the classroom and things like that as well. But this has kind of been really, really useful. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Abdul.